Good afternoon, everybody. I think I meant to use the microphone. Start, isn't it? Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming along, and also hello if you are across the UK or indeed further afield today. My name is Elizabeth Anderson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Digital Poverty Alliance. Hopefully, if you've made it this far, you know that we're a UK-wide registered charity, and you know our whole aim is to end digital exclusion once and for all. And we think of digital exclusion as being the inability of an individual to get online how, where, and when they need to. And all of that is incredibly important, because what does that really sum up as? That sums up as you need the right device, you need it when you need it, and you need to be able to use it where you need to use it. So that means having to maybe travel 20 miles to the library is not digital inclusion. It means completing your homework on a mobile phone is not digital inclusion. It means that people have a whole range of different tasks that they now need to be able to complete online in order to live their life. And that is what we are here trying to solve, because up to 19 million people across the UK can't. Things that we would think. Never? There we go. Hold it up, hold it away. Right, now I'm holding it nearer. I'm sure this is some kind of digital skills in action situation that's happening right now. We have moved so much online in the last 25 years. When we were set up as the e-learning foundation, as we were, you had to have an E at the front because that told you that it was digital. That was the big clue. When we were set up as the e-learning foundation, this was about getting computers into classrooms. I'm sure some people will remember even going into Tesco and you'd get those little computers for schools vouchers, because it was such a piece of innovation to get computers into a classroom. 25 years ago, I wasn't part of this charity. David Burrows, who's hiding at the back, he was part of this. He was one of the founding people who made the e-learning foundation happen back when Microsoft supported us to get going, when we were founded all that time ago. Now, though, I would hazard a guess everybody in this room has a computer in their pocket or their bag or sitting on your knee. We all have that access immediately. But 1 in 5 children still don't. 1 in 5 children are still living in digital poverty. They're still leaving that classroom, being set homework, being set coursework, being set other educational tasks, and they still can't do that. Now, I'm sure this isn't just me. 25 years. I'll keep going. If you're watching online, I'm really sorry about this. 25 years. These on and off. There we go. Digital was as much a physical place that you had to go to. You had to go to that space in your house. You had to go to that space in an office. You had to go to that space in the classroom. Now it is ubiquitous. It is everywhere. It is tied up in every part of our lives. It is tied up in aspiration. How can you aspire to more if you can't get online? It is tied up in our education system. It is tied up in how we access work, not just how we do work, but 90% of jobs, according to the House of Lords Digital Inclusion Inquiry, are only ever advertised online. Yet there are still people who think, well, if you've got a smartphone, that's good enough. If you've been online in the last 3 months, that's good enough. That's what the ONS data is based on. Have you been online one time in the past 3 months? Have we been online at all in the past 3 minutes? Probably very likely for a lot of people here. 3 months does not get you anything that you would need to achieve. It's also tied up in our well-being, and this is a complicated loop back, because of course it's tied up in how we access healthcare, it's tied up in how we access health information, It's how we get our prescriptions and our appointments. It's how we provide the data and information that our physicians and other doctors need. But also there's huge concerns about the well-being risks of being online too much, the algorithms that children see and access, whether they're scrolling too much on a smartphone, which loops us back again to the fact that we still don't have one-to-one devices in our schools, and so many children are reliant on having that smartphone to access their education. At the DPA, we do not feel that a smartphone is suitable for education. We do believe that you need a keyboarded device, and that keyboard gap actually is a huge part of digital exclusion for children. And I'm proud that we will be launching further research on this next month. It is, however, not just access. It's also confidence and resilience. And too often, this is framed as digital skills. Now, actually, what does digital skills mean? It means different things to different people. I kind of still, instinctively, even after nearly 5 years in this job, I kind of instinctively see digital skills as, can I use Word? Can I use a keyboard? That's not digital confidence, though. And we at the DPA are moving much more to talking about digital confidence, online literacy, digital resilience. These are the skills that people need, because that term digital skills arguably is meaningless. It doesn't actually describe that suite of different elements that everybody needs to have a safe and enjoyable experience online. Digital confidence, though, covers not just those hard skills. Can I change a password? Can I connect to the Wi-Fi? Can I use Word? Can I use a search engine? It's also, can I critically evaluate what I'm looking at? Do I know that this is an AI-generated picture? Can I stay safe online? Will I recognize a scam email when it comes in? All of these different elements that make up that digital confidence that also means that you can do what certainly I do and other people my age do, fiddle around and find out, play about with it, feel okay just messing about online with a system and not thinking, I'm gonna break this, I'm gonna lose all of my money. I daren't mess about with it. I shouldn't play with the NHS app, I might do something terrible with my health record. No, we have to give people the confidence that they can understand what they can and can't do. So the big thing is, where now? So you have on your seats our 25th anniversary report. Indicate just how much we've been doing over the last 25 years since we were founded in 2001. And you also have the 4th edition of our National Delivery and Advocacy Plan. We are halfway through phase 2, so we cleared off phase 1 last year. We're halfway through phase 2 now. And we have some new additions to the plans, as well as carrying on work that we already started last year. Some of the big successes over the past year have included the publication of our zero rating report, looking at when data decides access, and the fact that zero rating could provide a way to help people who cannot afford to have mobile phone contracts but rely on pay-as-you-go data to have a safety net so that they can always access public sector services, NHS services, those provided by their local authority, without that coming off their data allowance. We published our media literacy report at the House of Lords, drawing attention to a wide range of media literacies, including algorithmic literacy, something that is seeing growing attention over the past few months. We are also close to concluding our health inquiry, which is looking at the intersection between digital inclusion and health outcomes, particularly with reference to geographies around the whole of the UK, towns versus rural experiences, thinking about the role that gender plays within health outcomes as well as digital inclusion outcomes. And also thinking about the different life stages that people go through. Maybe it's maternity care, maybe it's older people, maybe it is younger people seeking mental health support. And we've been delighted to receive so many submissions, both from charities and organisations in our network, but also from individuals and patients who have feedback that they want to share with us. For the year ahead, we're also focusing, of course, on some of the newer digital announcements that have come from government. Digital ID and what this means for people who simply cannot get online, but may well need this to access a range of public services, not just work. What the social media ban means in terms of considering media literacy and a safe online platform for all. Whilst we do support that there need to be drastic changes and that a ban may be an answer for children to be protected, we also must continue to hold the big tech companies to account to ensure that they are not promoting harmful content online. We are also, of course, incredibly proud to be a part of the Digital Inclusion Action Committee, and there is so much that we're already doing as part of that, and again, really pleased that we are working with the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology on a pilot repurposing devices from Whitehall and getting those back out to people in need. But even more than that, I'm delighted that Baroness Armstrong of Hilltop has very kindly agreed to spend a few minutes on her reflections on the successes of the committee so far and also what comes next. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I will try with the mic. Presumably the mic is necessary for the online services, is it? Yeah, because otherwise I can just shout. I'm used to that. Okay, it's very good to see you all. I was reflecting when I was thinking about this afternoon that when we came into government a couple of years ago, digital inclusion was hardly on the state agenda. All the work had been done by organisations like Digital Poverty Alliance, Good Things, other charities, other third sector civil society that were actually making sure things on the ground were happening, despite there being, you know, mainly people in government, it seems to me, and, you know, I can say this because I'm not a civil servant, and nor am I in government now. So I can say, it seems to me, the digital inclusion agenda was thought to be about how far the network spread, rather than about how we actually make sure that people who are not accessing what they could, but they couldn't afford it, who didn't have the skills to interact, who didn't have the devices, but also who were a bit scared of it. Nobody was really, from the state end of things, addressing that. So I want to say thank you to all of you in this room who have been addressing that and who have been doing things. When the government realized that there wasn't a dedicated unit looking at this in government, let alone across government, they began work in the department on the Digital Inclusion Action Plan. And they published that over a year ago and announced at the same time that they were going to have a Digital Inclusion Action Committee. And they asked me to chair that, largely because I say I'm not anybody who's very skilled in this area. I am old. I didn't grow up in a digital world, but I do know about people who are socially excluded. And so the minister and the SPAD, who I'd worked with before, both of them, they thought I'd be the ideal person to take this up, because I sort of was like on the other side of it, if you see what I mean. So I'm here, and I don't pretend that I understand a lot of the world that you are very familiar with. But I do know that people need good access to public services if their lives at this stage of where we are going to be tolerable, let alone good. They need that proper open access to all that a public service can offer. And we know that in the future, those public services will be finding their improvements largely through digital means. And if we think about the health service, it's just so obvious. I keep reading about the latest invention, if you like, in the health service and the latest research in the health service. And so much of it is through imaging, through digital work. And actually, patients need to feel they have agency in all of that. And mothers, in particular, need to feel that they have some agency in how their children are being treated. So digital access across the board has become much more important, and we all have to pay attention to it. So I am pleased that now it is recognized that, and it's recognized in the papers you have in front of you today, that digital inclusion is now more firmly in the national debate and is there across government in ways that means a lot of this is just being come to terms with rather than clear and straightforward. And I know that's still confusing for people and irritating to people, but that is the reality as people are coming to terms with what their department, let alone another department, needs to be doing. This will take its time. But on the other hand, the companies that devise all the programs and so on, they're working at speeds we all find difficult to keep up with. And we have to make sure that what we're doing isn't just trailing along, but is actually able to help regulate all of that a lot more effectively. And so we will be making sure, and one of the things we're going to have to do is make sure that the regulatory framework is much more effective. But I'm very pleased that all of that matters for what the government agenda is going to be. And it is only by working not just across government, but by working with civil society and with the industry that we really will crack this issue for the people that it really makes a difference to in their lives and in their daily lives. I attended recently a meeting of the Interdepartmental Committee. And it was a really good meeting. As ever in government, meetings only last an hour, so you've got to get your agenda through. But we had representatives from the key departments there, about 8 of them. And it was a very action-orientated event where they had all been prepped that what Liz Lloyd as chair would be looking for was what their committee, what their department was actually going to do on issues. And Liz has now written to me and to the Digital Inclusion Action Committee, really setting out the commitment across government to really begin to deliver more effectively in their own departments and not just see it as a DCIT issue. And that is very important. But it is government's aim that we help more people get fast, reliable and affordable internet. that we ensure more people get the devices they need. And so I do want to say thank you to Digital Poverty Alliance and others for the government, for the donation work and the government device donation pilot that that you're working with is really important in this. But we also want to strengthen, they also want to strengthen effective digital support in local communities, applying what has already been learnt. And they want to own and update the essential digital skills framework, which is so important, as Elizabeth said before me. And they want to make digital services work for everyone and embed digital inclusion across government. And DIAC is there to advise the government on these things and on specifics which help to achieve those more general aims. So DIAC have put in a response to the digital ID consultation. They have put in a response to the whole thing about social housing and access to the internet. I see DIAC as being very much an advisory and as probably going further than the government is able to or willing to go at any particular stage, but of helping them to move as much as they can within the framework that they're working on. And it is a really tough agenda, but I wanted to just reflect on what's happening with digital ID. They set up, I met James Frith, who's the Minister at the Cabinet Office with responsibility for this, on day one. And he now says virtually at every meeting that he now understands that his agenda is all about digital inclusion. Because my view is, if you get these things right around digital inclusion, then you get it right for the rest of the population. And so if you start from, is this going to work for the most disadvantaged, you actually end up in the right place. And they are in the middle of this incredible consultation. And I'm on the advisory board for the consultation, as are a couple of other members of DIAC who understand the digital bit a bit more than me. And we were at a meeting last week which was uplifting. They're halfway through the consultation that is taking place after the online consultation. And they have a panel of 150 people, and it's been our job as the advisory group to make sure that that is a representative panel of the different views, and that they are being exposed now to the whole range of views about this. So they're not being told, this is what you have to do. It is. And there was the Matt, who is from Crisis, he's Chief Executive of Crisis. And I've done lots on homelessness in my political career. Matt had been to one of the away days that was essentially a citizens' jury, where the 150 people are there and they go through issues with experts, get the opportunity to challenge them, to discuss it in small groups, and then come back into a larger session. And he said to me, it is the most uplifting event he's ever been to about how you actually develop policy and about social policy. And he said, I came away thinking they could be dealing with much more difficult issues than this through this methodology. So that's not yet finished. They have actually a 3-hour session tonight online with the panel. They have another 3-hour session on Thursday online with the panel, and then they have another weekend for them all together in a room in Birmingham. And so this is being done very seriously. James now believes that they should be calling it, instead of digital ID, digital access for public services, because that's how people are looking at it. And that is how it's actually coming out, that it's really important, if you want your public service, to be able to be who you say you are. And for the people giving the service to know it's you, so that they can get your records and so on and so forth. So it's a really interesting way of doing things, which DIAC is right in the middle of, and is right in the middle of looking at and thinking about and considering how the public are interacting with this, and whether we make sure that the most disadvantaged actually are able to be represented. And I can tell you, one of the big issues is, do you include your address? Because for homeless people, one of the big advantages for me is you get a digital ID, you'll be able to get a bank account, and you'll be able to therefore get the basics which will help you get property, get the right to rent or into a hostel. You can't even get into a hostel these days unless you can prove who you are. But if you've got to have your address as part of that, that would be difficult. So, you know, it's all those sorts of things that have to be looked at, which come at what is it? Who is it that we're talking about? Who is it that we actually need to think our way through what the different issues are? And how do we do that in a way that does bring opportunity and fairness to everybody? That's what we're all about. We all have a role to play. This cannot be done by any one organization on their own. And none of us know better than the next organization. We will know differently. And the differences are important because that helps us deal with the very different communities of excluded that we're dealing with. So thank you for all your work. Keep working with us. Keep telling us what you think we need to be doing in DIAC so that we can reflect that back into government. It's a huge agenda. It's a fascinating agenda, but it is very, very important. And it will affect how children grow up, their confidence in their lives and what they're able to do in a way that most of us have never considered in the past. So thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of the day and keep at it. Right, Elizabeth. I'm not sure I managed your mic any better than you.
We do have some microphone challenges today, so if you are online, do bear with us. And a huge thanks again to Baroness Armstrong at Hilltop for those reflections on everything that's happening with the Digital Inclusion Action Plan, Digital Inclusion Action Committee, and the wider work across government that is happening around digital policy at the moment. We're now going to move on to our first panel session. So, you know, if you're on this panel, please come up and join me. We have Charlotte Walsh from Direct. We have Dr. Phil Wilkinson from Bournemouth University. We have Teresa Ahaj from Foreign Digital. I believe that Baroness Armstrong is potentially going to join us for the panel as well. Fantastic. Thank you. Fantastic, thank you all, and this one works, so that's good news. If I could just ask each panellist just to give a very brief introduction to themselves and their interest in the panel session today. So I'll start with Charlotte.
Hi, I'm Charlotte. I'm from the UK charity In Kind Direct. Really just interested to hear other perspectives, but I guess I'm really bringing the lens of what it's like for local charitable organisations on the ground to be delivering some of this national policy day to day.
Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm very glad the mic is working. I'm working currently for All Digital. We are a European-based non-profit organization which is tackling digital inclusion in Europe. We have a membership of around 120 organizations, and I think what I'm excited to talk about today is our perception of digital inclusion throughout the EU, and good practices from our organizations, how they are impacting positively and bringing digital inclusion on the ground.
Super, and yes, mine is working as well. Well, I'm Dr. Phil Wilkinson. My background is computer science, so I'm a huge nerd. And then I started doing research in teaching people about technology, which includes kind of embedding myself in community spaces to help actually deliver sessions, do drop-ins, getting people online for the first time, to try and kind of map and see the connection between these bigger policy discussions and what's happening on the ground.
You've had me.
And I think you probably worked out who Baroness Armstrong is and also who I am. So what we're going to be looking at for the next half hour or so is the progress that's been made since the Digital Inclusion Action Plan came out last year, the first in over 10 years in the way of a government strategy. So to everybody really, I don't know who'd like to kick us off. What lessons do you feel have been learned from a year of that action plan? What have we done well? What can we improve for the future? Phil, you look ready to go, you're poised.
Well, I feel like I've been a bit preempted and gazumped because my initial thinking was to be fairly provocative and critical of what the government's currently doing in terms of the digital action plan. But then Baroness Armstrong preempted all of that and was very reassuring in what she identified. I think there has been a lot of lessons learned. I think the most reassuring thing that's come out of this is it seems to be there's actual commitment to this to make it sustainable rather than it kind of being effectively outsourced to this kind of fragmented network of charities and commercial providers. So I think that's the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, happy to come in. I think there's been a realisation, and again, what Baroness Armstrong was saying earlier, that digital inclusion or exclusion is such an underpinning and compounding factor of every facet of not having what you need in life the way you need it, when you need it, where you need it. So seeing that coming through much more clearly in policy and in papers that are coming out is really encouraging. I think potentially something I think would be interesting looking ahead is the issue is so big, and you won't often find me arguing against universality of equality, everyone should have everything they need, but actually in this instance I think a more equitable approach is probably helpful, and starting with those who are furthest away from inclusion may actually help to level the playing field a bit quicker. So that would probably be my feed in.
And Baroness Armstrong, any particular lessons learned that you feel as chair?
Let me think. I am continually struck by how difficult it is to get messages across which everyone in government realises this applies to me too. But also how you get the messages across to the public in ways that they have confidence in. I mean, I often say I live in a block of flats in Greenwich. It's a long story as to why we ended up there, but we're in there, and there's one of those WhatsApp groups that covers the block, and somebody comes in one day, my Brazilian cleaner can't communicate with the school for her daughter. She needs a laptop she needed a device. And I said, I very rarely go into the WhatsApp group, but I did say, have you been to the hub, which is at the end of the road in the library, where she'll get a device, she'll get help with getting onto the school's app and into the homework stuff, and there'll be other people there who'll help her out, and she might even get some free Wi-Fi, because they do that at the local hub. And nobody in the building knew about the hub. So, how do we actually, I didn't know there are over 1,000 hubs in London. There are over 3,000, probably now over 4,000 in the country. And nobody knows about them. My own hometown of Sunderland, they have 37 hubs, but the council put the stuff out about that. But they know a lot of folk don't trust the council, so they have to get the voluntary sector to put it out as well. So, you know, it's how do we actually communicate in ways that folk trust and pick it up. And I know that that has got to be, it's what I've learnt, but, you know, I've also learned how much people's lives are changed once they do go there. I was going to say something about some of the hubs I visited. They're really inspirational, but I knew I was going over time. So, you know, it really is transformative for a lot of people, but we have to get them there.
Yeah, I think, just to echo that, I think, so I spent 3 years embedded in a digital skills hub, which was designed to do this exact thing. And we found that most of our time actually was doing social media, doing promotional work, effectively doing like a marketing comms branding strategy around it, you know, translating things like the essential digital skills framework into something that's a bit less dry and a bit more palatable to people, and also trying to navigate, you know, this sense of deficiency that can sometimes kind of like weave into some of these conversations, and also this issue of trust where we were effectively funded by the council, but we would, you know, it was effectively a dirty word to say that. So I think it's kind of reassuring that we're starting to learn now in terms of, you know, a place-based approach. So like meeting people where they already are. So that kind of takes away some of the comms strategy in terms of awareness and trust, by actually just supporting, well, effectively the organizations that are kind of pretty much already doing this work anyway, and just making sure they're, you know, sustainably resourced.
And of course, there's already so many networks of organisations that are those trusted local faces. Charlotte, I don't know if you'd come in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And your phrase absolutely was where I was going, of meeting people where they are. If children are in school, if they're going to the youth centre after school, if people do use their local library, if they're going to their GP centre, if they're still able to use a bank branch, if that's where they are, then that's where they need to hear about the resources. I still remember the circular conversation of someone saying, well, can they not just go online and Google it? And I just, it's like, I didn't even know where to start with that, so I just kind of ignored it and moved on. But I think when I think about the network that In-Kind Direct works with, we work with about 9,000 local charities, food banks, schools, community centres across the UK. And about a third of the people they work with are digitally excluded. So they are at the real sharp end of what's going on. And just to give you a stat and to touch on the point that was made about sustainable resourcing, last year, about 90% of them said their income either stayed the same or went down, but 3/4 of them saw need in their community go up. So you've got a lot of organisations who are the most trusted part of their community being asked to keep doing more with less. So I agree, I think they are absolutely the digital champions. They are the people who have the trust, who can build that empathy and that compassion, but they cannot keep doing it for free.
And as we so frequently see, services look to cut their expenditure by moving things online, but who is it that soaks up that support that is required within local communities to help the people on the ground who otherwise wouldn't be able to access these digital services? That is the charities, it is the VCSE organisations, it's the libraries, it's the family workers who haven't been trained to do this. And of course, this isn't a uniquely UK problem. Teresa, can you give us a bit of perspective from some European comparisons?
Yes. You know, while I was listening to all of your really great examples and data, I just remembered one of our organizations back in Hungary who also encountered, you know, this widespread problem. It's definitely not a UK problem. It is a European problem. It is an international, global issue. How can we reach every single person? How can we, you know, bridge this digital divide that it's very much going on right now? I mean, just if you look at the numbers, 90% of the jobs at the moment in the EU, that's EU data, but I'm pretty sure in the UK it's pretty similar, require basic digital skills. 56% of people in the job of adults actually in the EU right now have these basic digital skills. So these are numbers that really go to show how action needs to be really taken in the ground. And coming back to this Hungarian organization of ours, what they would do is that they would take their van and they would go to these very remote villages in the countryside of Hungary, and they would go to these people's houses. Most of them were older people, and they would be very much excluded from anything, really. And they were also disabled, impaired, unable to go to the nearest community center where they could find assistant help. So they would go there. And of course, I mean, not everyone, not every organization have the means, even the physical means or the financial means to do that. But the difference is when you see this happening, you know that it can happen in other places. You know that maybe your organization can find ways to go to people instead of expecting them to go to you. Because the reality is that most people who are excluded, they are the least, prone to be the ones going willingly to your organization, your community center, your library, your NGO. So then you have to find ways to connect with them, and obviously, they might not go online and look for your LinkedIn page or Instagram. So I think that was, for me, that's one among many other examples that really struck me as, oh my God, yes, that's how you do it, That's a face-to-face, human-to-human contact. And I think one element that's important is to bring training, to bring the skills, right? You need to build the trust before that. Mm. And that brings me to a different example of an organization in Spain who, what they are doing, they are building programs for young people who are unemployed and who also like digital skills. What they're doing is that they're trying to make their trainings comprehensive, meaning we're not just teaching you digital skills, we're also going to teach you a lot of different skills that you need on the job market, right? And they are so ingrained in their local community because these programs have been running for years that naturally people hear about them. So what you have to do on the ground is to basically build a very strong local infrastructure and ecosystem. And naturally, your programs, your organizations, will be part of this digital inclusion ecosystem, will be part of life, around in the community. And this is how people reach out to you because they trust you, because such and such neighbor has trusted you before. So I would say, these are some examples that I've been hearing from some of our organizations that really strike me as this is how maybe we get closer to the people and we bridge the digital divide. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a really key point. It's not as simple as saying, build it and they'll come, because that need for trust, any time that you're actually reaching out and asking for help, you are displaying a vulnerability. And you don't want to go and do that with people that you've never met, your friends have never met, nobody's ever been able to tell you anything about whether these guys will help you, potentially with something quite personal. If it's related to a child, if it's related to healthcare, even looking for a job, you don't necessarily just want to tell some random stranger that you've never met before all of your problems. And when we think about building that ecosystem and pulling these levers in an ever more digital world, where do we think, as a panel, that responsibility sits? As Baroness Armstrong said, one organisation is not going to sort out digital exclusion across the UK, Europe, the world. But who needs to take that lead?
Well, I would start by saying that it's a shared responsibility. You cannot just, as a local organization, you are very, very useful on the ground, but you definitely need this network, this connection with your government. So at the EU level, the member states, right? Mm-hmm. And then, the European Union. So if I give I'm going to try to not be too technical about it, but the EU is coming up with legislation, mainly around, how to be safe online and confident online, navigating, the online world safely, etc. And then with some, regulations, frameworks, guidelines for citizens and also organizations, etc., etc. Then you have the fundings for projects like Erasmus+. I'm pretty sure, maybe I'm assuming that most of you might haven't heard of Erasmus+, and other types of funding. So these are tools basically given by the EU to empower the local ecosystem to be able to deliver, you know, the skills, the confidence, critical thinking, the trainings, etc. So this is a shared responsibility, and I think obviously one cannot leave and be strengthened without the other. So that's what I would say. This is an ecosystem again. I mean, this is the my word of the day.
Yeah, I think for two things I want to talk about. So I think that the government bears some responsibility for this as well, and I'm using that in the kind of most general catch-all way, because I think there's also responsibility to how we got to this point to begin with. So, you know, we have the digital by default agenda since the early 2000s, which meant digitization of a lot of public services, which effectively created a lot of digital exclusion we see today. And now the challenge is that, you know, the government is responsible for solving this problem that they were kind of also complicit in creating. So it's almost like, do we start rolling back some of these things? I think in terms of what that responsibility looks like on the ground is, I think talking about digital exclusion is almost the wrong word to use, because it implies like this is a discrete, separate thing, rather than just exclusion, of which digital is a dimension, because people are very rarely just digitally excluded. So when that responsibility does kind of filter down to support workers, local charities, librarians, GP receptionists, they're no longer just having to provide digital access support, they're also having to help people navigate, you know, a plethora of different government services that can be quite, you know, loaded and emotional and challenging and human.
And just to round that out, and I hate a panel that always agrees, but I do tend to agree with my fellow panelists, this is a systemic issue, which means everyone has a role to play. I'm minded to agree that at a national level, this will only change if there is a national accountability, which means government in the broadest sense. But I look at businesses who also have the trust of their consumers, who have a vested interest in their employees and their customers being more digitally savvy and being able to access the best of what they have to offer. So I think there is a role for every part of society to play. I think there's also a big potential role for how devolution actually happens. So how you have that national umbrella of that national commitment, but also how it's delivered regionally to recognise the nuance of local need, local resource, and what the community in that space actually looks like. But I do think, yeah, a systemic issue is going to take everyone to solve it, to be able to actually make a real difference.
Well, I did say that when I was speaking. You know, we all have our role to play. And if we leave it expecting somebody else is going to do it, it won't happen. And it is that we just have to find new and different ways, and that there are some very discrete groups who do not get access, and it's very difficult to work out on some occasions what to actually do about that. And that's where the industry and the products they design and the whole design of products, not just of hardware, but also of software, is really, really important in this agenda. You know, another example, which I've given at a public meeting before, and he's all right about me giving it, but David Blunkett, we were out to dinner, and we're going to share the bill, but he has to tell me his code, because the device is not facilitated for blind people. And you know, that shouldn't happen. And it's just, as I say, there are some very discrete things which require more than just kind people in the hub, but which require the industry to actually produce devices that work for the range of people we're talking about, but then design programs in a way that are more accessible and easier. And, you know, government departments have got to make sure that they produce. I mean, DWP does some things really well and some things really badly. And we talk to them about that. So, you know, it's right across the board.
It is, and there is so much opportunity still for this joining up, both between government departments, between local authorities, between industry, between community groups, but also that more vertical integration, everybody working together with this shared goal. Does anyone in the audience, either here in person or online, if you are online, there's a live chat facility, and my colleague Claire is watching out for that, so she'll read out your questions if you have anything online. Who would like to ask a question of our panel here today? Don't be afraid to be the first one, because somebody has to be the first one. Brilliant. We've got a microphone coming to you. If you can just give your name and organisation before you ask your question.
Hello everybody, fantastic panel. Helen Ward, Rural Action Derbyshire. I run a digital inclusion project across the county. We have the most amazing volunteers, community groups doing all the work on the ground. The real challenge is the funding. Do we think there is going to be more government level funding coming? Because we weren't able to participate in the recent grants because of the time frames of delivery in this last round. How do we see the next stage coming? Does anyone have any insight on that funding? It's so critical.
All I can say is funding is the most challenging area for everybody at the moment. And, you know, it is... And this is one of the reasons why, of course, departments want and know they've got to go digital as effectively and as efficiently as they can. Because if they can deliver more services in a digital way, in the longer term, not in the short term, but in the longer term, that is an efficiency thing as well. But they've then got to get the money to get it up to that scale first. So the whole thing is very difficult, and I can't promise you additional money. And I don't know yet, we don't know yet what's happening for the next round. We've not had any DSIT. When I say we, it's not me, but DSIT have not yet had confirmation from Treasury what they're going to get in the next round.
Just come in on that, and thank you, because you, I think that was the obvious first question, and you handled it gracefully. Thank you. I think there are a couple of things I'd add to that. One is there is a lot of resource around. When we did some work in Kind Direct last year up in Telford and Wrekin of looking at what was in the VCSE sector, local council, local companies collectively, and there is a lot, but it's not in the places where you'd want it to be. And so there's some really good case studies in Norwich and in Telford where they're looking at how services are commissioned at a local level to start to build some of these things in and actually make sure the expertise and the resource is in the best possible place. So it's not extra resource, but it's spreading it in a way that's actually going to achieve more impact. The other thing I would add is the huge number of funders who are constantly closing to applications to review their strategies and then reopening to applications. But actually the recognition there that digital inclusion is a thread that runs through so many things. So I would say there may be en masse more funding available there because there is a recognition of how intrinsic digital inclusion is to everything else.
I think the microphone is making its way. It's on a Mexican wave towards you.
Thank you. My name is John Spain. My house is Tech for All this afternoon. One of my particular bugbears about digital exclusion is my age group. And my GP surgery has a fairly universally used system for patients to get repeat prescriptions, to plead for appointments, whatever. Getting into this system can be a nightmare. I think I am fairly IT literate. It took me 10 minutes to get through the system, capture after capture after capture. Does anybody here know what a fire hydrant is? You have to guess. It's not just financial resources, it's also the voluntary sector. But what about those people who would be prepared to volunteer, who have the time? I'm simply not aware of any system. Our GP surgery actually had it suggested by the PPG, that the patient practice group, that we should have people available to help other patients in the surgery, and that was blown out of the water because of GDPR. Privacy, trust is important. So some people out there are not getting their prescriptions, not getting any health care at all, really, unless they've got somebody to advocate for them. So I've heard Charlotte, for example, mention that our organisations around, please try to circulate details. I would like details, because otherwise I haven't got a clue how I get into this network. And I'm not trying to cheat them, I promise.
I think it's such an interesting point that actually there's so many people who probably would have the time to be able to volunteer their skills to help others to get online. My GP has just merged with another GP. I've given up on the NHS app, which is a really bad thing to say, but it's also true that, you know, it's incredibly complicated and it takes time to learn these systems. Every GP may be using a different app, may be using a different service. And actually, nobody's going to be an expert in every single option that might be available in any given town. But I think certainly from your experiences in the Digital Skills Hub, you must have worked with groups wanting to help other people.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a lot of really good local practice, and I think this is the tension between kind of national policy conversations and how that translates into kind of place-based approaches as well. And I think your point kind of speaks to the kind of focus on digital competence and adaptability, because most technology sucks. Really, it doesn't work, it gets updated, it breaks, you get a new device, software changes, what have you. So there does need to be a focus on, you know, equipping people to be able to respond when the GP moves to another application or something like that.
There is a lot going on this. And in health in particular, they know that they've got to sort this. So we have a bill in front of Parliament at the moment that is, half of it is about moving away from NHSE, everything going at the department so that one organisation is responsible and can be held accountable. But the other part of the bill, the main part of the bill, is actually a single digital patient record, a single patient record, which will of course be digital. Because at the moment, your GP may well be doing things differently to a different GP, and certainly to the hospital, and certainly to the neighbourhood centre. And so they can't communicate with each other, and you've got different access for all of them. And what we're saying is there needs to be one access route to it all. And hopefully that will help. Too many GPs have used the difficulties as a reason for not using digital access. But if you, Age UK are doing a lot with the NHS, British Red Cross are doing a lot and providing a lot of volunteers and doing community place-based work. There are organisations that are onto this, and the new neighbourhood health system, they are seeing digital work as a critical part of the spread out of neighbourhood health. So we shall see.
And I think those neighbourhood health centres actually have so much promise in terms of really being able to support this much wider issue of how digital inclusion and health outcomes do intersect. That is the end of our first panel. Time flies when you're having fun. I'm going to ask each of our panellists, though, just to give us one final reflection. So as we think about the Digital Inclusion Action Plan that came out last year, that's been over a year. So what's your one hope in the coming year? What's the one thing you'd like to say?
I think my one hope is there have been some really good pilots. I think we're now past the point of pilots. I think the people in this room know what works, and I think we need to now move to some longer term investment and actually the ability for organisations to commit to 3-5 years of activity without having to worry about the next 6 months of funding.
So I think the one thing I want to end this panel with is keep focusing on building strong social local infrastructure. You cannot imagine how important I mean, yes, you probably can imagine because you are inside of them, you are working for people, which you should be very proud of. Keep building these programs, these projects. Don't look at digital inclusion and the activities you're providing as shorter projects. This is a long time investment. It's not just about money. Of course, you need money, right? You need funding, but it's about investing in people. So you need to invest time. You need to invest in trust, in building trust before actually building, you know, the skills and the accessibility.
I'm echoing the same sentiments, really. I think that the action plan is a genuinely a good first step moving in the right direction. So now it's just having the ambition, commitment to see it through over the long term.
I think we have not to see digital inclusion as an end message. It is about opening up opportunities for people that they have then got the confidence to take. And the reason you want them to be digitally included is so that they can do that, so that they've got the skills to get the job, rather than just they can enjoy the skills in their own bedroom. We've got to see this as changing people's opportunities, and that's the responsibility for all of us.
Thank you all so much for your insights. Certainly on behalf of the DPA, we look very much forward to seeing what the next step is following those first steps. And as a member of the Digital Inclusion Action Committee, I continue to be excited to see what policy announcements are going to be coming next and first, arguably. Thank you very much. We're going to take a little bit of a break so you can have a little bit of networking time, grab an orange juice, and then we'll be sitting back down about 3:30. Okay, welcome back. I think there are some people who are still wandering around, so they may hear the sound coming through the speakers and go, oh, should come back. If you're watching online, I hope you've had a good break, and thank you for staying with us. And we're now moving on to our second panel, and we're going to be really focusing on a couple of really key and often forgotten issues when it comes to digital inclusion, which is that choice, consent, empowerment are all really fundamental within this. And it plays back into some of the issues that Teresa was raising earlier around trust. We can't force people online. We need to ensure that people always have that choice about how their information is being used and how they are accessing different services. So I'm delighted that once again we've got some fantastic panellists. I'm going to ask each to just briefly, again, intro yourselves and your interest in the conversations today. I'm going to start with Caroline.
Hopefully the microphone working, yes? Okay. My name's Caroline Whitson, and I am down from Argyll and Bute. So I will try and speak slowly and clearly, but I do get quite passionate about this, so if I get carried away, I'll get Laurie to get me a dunt. I manage the community learning team for Live Argyll, and we are an arm's length organisation attached very loosely to Argyll and Bute Council. My passion for this is that we deal with people day in, day out who are facing digital literacy issues, digital skills issues, and digital poverty issues. So we're seeing it at the sharp end all the time. We struggle for resources to help these people and to support them. And always looking for the best solution and the best way forward. So that's where I am at the moment.
Hello there. Yeah, I'm Laurie Patton. I work for a company called Arkiva. There's no reason why you should have known about Arkiva, but effectively we're a media infrastructure company that runs effectively all of your terrestrial TV and radio services across the UK. So masts like Crystal Palace, Emily Moor in Yorkshire, there's over 1,000 sites across the UK where we are using that to deliver traditional TV and radio services across the country. That service, so anything effectively delivered by an aerial, often known as Freeview. Terrestrial TV still accounts for about 40% of all viewing in the UK. Around 13 million households use it, and 10 million households have it on their main TV set. So it's still a substantial service. The reason why I think I'm here and to be part of this discussion is that the long-term future for those services is uncertain, and the government is currently looking at proposals and options to possibly turn off those services in 2034, and it's due to issue a green paper on the subject in the coming months. So clearly that does create issues, and I'll come on to talk about why we believe it should be continued, but creates issues in terms of digital poverty and uptake.
Hello, I'm Jenny Sims. I have 3 hats on today. I'm here, I thought, originally because I campaign for the National Pensioners Convention, which represents more than 1 million people, and I'm involved there on the Executive Council as a representative of the NUJ because I've got 2 other hats. I'm still a functioning freelance journalist. I'm chair of the NUJ's 60+ Council, which campaigns and keeps an eye on ageism, exclusion, equality, other issues. And I edit, and I find I've turned up with a label saying I am a co-editor of Senior Reporter, so I will be doing an article on this meeting today, on this, on these issues. And I've got a new hat as of 3 days ago, because at the recent leadership meeting here, I asked, how can Southwark Council, Southwark Pensioners Action Group become involved? Because I've just moved to Southwark about 2 years ago, and I'm getting more involved in local issues on campaigning. And I was told, well, apply to become a member of our circle, a community circle. So along with Susan today, we're here as well to represent Southwark Pensioners Action Group.
Brilliant. We've gone from having 3 organisations to 5 in the space of about 2 minutes. That's brilliant. So let us kick off with the sort of simple question. As a panel, do you agree, and we don't all have to agree about everything, but do you agree that it is important to maintain the integrity of offline options throughout every area of essential service as part of a hybrid approach to public services and other essential services in the UK. I don't know who'd like to kick us off on that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on that one. I do think it's incredibly important. As I started to introduce in my introduction about the role of terrestrial TV and radio services in the country, as I said, still used by 13 million households, 11 million use it on their primary set. If you go back to 2020, it was 10 million have it on their primary set. If you go back into 2020, it was 11 million. So it really hasn't changed that much in terms of overall reliance. It provides universal coverage service, so everyone in the country can get TV, and you only have to pay a license fee. You don't need a broadband connection to get it, so that's a real safety net for society. Whilst a lot of people are consuming streaming services and clearly watching things like Netflix, YouTube, BBC iPlayer, there's still around 3 million homes who are only relying on DTT, or terrestrial television. So that's the only way they can get TV services at the moment. And it's only guaranteed till 2034. Now, this government proposal is that in 2034, we could force everyone to just have to consume their TV over the internet. And you'd need a high-speed fixed broadband to do that. So it would take away that free view service. Now, the reason why I think, choice is important, you get lots of forecasts in this sort of area, but some forecasts suggest that there could still be over 5 million households who are just really heavily reliant on Freeview in 2034, and even by 2045 there could still be around 3 million households who are in that position. So things really aren't changing that quickly. You've got, I believe, around 1.5 million homes who don't have fixed broadband. You have got lots of homes who are mobile only or low speed internet connections who really would struggle. And you've also got around 4.5 million homes who don't have a TV that's connected to the internet, so they don't have a connected TV. So there are huge obstacles to sort of thinking in the space of 7 years we could turn off all those services. We've put forward a proposal to government to say, why don't you extend it for another 10 years? As part of that, we can significantly reduce the cost for the broadcasters. You can protect viewers. We can actually modernise the network and release more radio spectrum, which is valuable for the government for other reasons. And it avoids all of the costs you'd have to incur and the challenges for people who would literally be faced with not having any TV if you couldn't afford a fixed broadband connection. So I do think it's important because I think people underestimate the role these services play within society, because I think people get quite fixated on perhaps the shiny, the new. It's all a discussion about YouTube. Is YouTube the new form of TV? And perhaps they forget just out there across the country how people are actually still consuming a huge amount of these services.
Absolutely, and I think that takes us on to a wide range of other issues as well. So many services, and actually TV is a really good example of this, because we can all sympathise with it. We can all imagine that we wouldn't want to feel that we were cut off from being able to watch television because we couldn't afford that broadband connection. But of course it extends out into a whole other range of health, of banking, of the digital ID conversations that we've been referencing earlier. Caroline, how does this manifest itself up in Argyll?
So one of the big areas that we have to worry about is the rural aspect of Argyll and Bute. We are a small numbered authority, but we are very large geographically. So are Highland and Islands, massive areas of land with small amounts of people. There are people within Argyll and Bute who have no fast fibre broadband, and there's no date for it coming. There's also areas in Argyll and Bute who have no mobile signal. So it's not as if it's an either-or situation. I have whole sections when I'm driving about, and I go all over Argyll and Bute, where I have no signal on my phone, and I'm with EE, who have got the most coverage across the UK. So, and EE are also the most expensive. But if the mobile system's not there, and the broadband system's not there, and you switch off these services or move everything online, what do these people do who are in the rural locations? And we're not just talking about elderly or what you would consider to be digitally excluded, traditional digitally excluded people. You're talking about families, you're talking about young people who maybe know exactly how to work a computer, know exactly how to access things online, but where they live means they can't. So if you remove these services, and the word which I've heard 3 or 4 times over the last few days is force people online, then what you're effectively doing is you're pushing these people into digital exclusion through no fault of their own. And it's a real worry. And this is everything from television and radio signals to council services to health services. It covers such a wide range. Education services. We heard earlier on today when people were talking about the classrooms moving all their homework and so on online. There are children, there are families who live on the islands within Argyll and Bute who cannot do their homework because it's online. So they have to do their homework in homework clubs, maybe on the mainland, before they then get a ferry to go home. To me, I don't think that's acceptable for any family to have to face. Why can't there be an alternative to that for those children? You're talking tiny amounts of people here. You're not talking about lots of people. It wouldn't be that hard. So not having a contingency in place has got a massive impact on rural communities. I'm speaking about Argyll and Bute, but I know that if you go to Highlands and Islands, you go to Shetlands, you go to Orkney, you're going to have exactly the same problems.
And I think, Jenny, potentially turning to you, do you feel that to a certain extent, when it comes to a lot of these decisions, they're taken by people who live in a digitally enabled world, and they kind of forget that you have these people who aren't techie? Maybe they don't have the access, maybe they don't have the skills, maybe they don't have the confidence, and they're kind of othered. They're a problem. We should think about that sometime, but let's do this, and hopefully they'll just get online.
Thank you so much for asking that particular question, because with my 3 hats on in the different spheres, I am continually shocked by the ignorance of people in work, whether it's in GP surgeries and in the meetings I still cover conferences. I'm covering a conference in September at the King's Fund on the NHS plan. And so it could be managers, it could be politicians who just do not get it, who do not understand that there are people out there who have no phones, who are not and apart from the people who don't wish to, there are people who don't. And if I can share something personal from 2 Sundays ago at my local church in Southwark, we have a new rector, Nigerian, great guy, great voice, great, right. And it was an annual general meeting. And so you were supposed to have elections for parochial church councils, vacancies, and there were 2 vacancies. But there was no report available. The only report available was via a chat, GPT. He's great at it, great communicator. And there's great chat for those who can in the small church. But the only notification for this meeting was that, and a QR code. And at the meeting, I said, but there are people here. Can we just have some printed copies? And great flurry. Yes, we had some. And afterwards, this wonderful rector said to me, not got a phone. I grabbed an older person, lady, and said, she hasn't got a phone. And he looked in astonishment. Got no phone. He's got loads of teenagers. He's got a house full of people. And I'm coming across people of all sectors who should know better. So if I bring in my journalist hat on here, so the role for us is to communicate more than we do. I mean, we do campaign, but we need stories, and we need lived experiences. And I'd like to pick up on Baroness Armstrong's appeal to us that it's a matter for everyone, not just whatever organizations we belong to or represent here, but personally. I mean, I've just shared something personal from my life that shocked me. That rector should know better in his position. And, so what I would appeal to everyone in this room, wherever you're from, if you've got something personal, don't shrug it off. try and do something about it. Who do you ring? Who do you phone? Who do you complain to? Who can you share it with? If you've got a local newspaper or whatever, just try and do something.
Just building on, because I think you raise a really important point there about things being used as a stick. Yeah. And I am actually quite amazed how often that school of thought is used as, and so in relation to TV, there's definitely a group out there suggesting that, well, if we take this service away, this will be the trigger that will force people to get high-speed broadband, and this is the way we actually achieve much higher uptake, because by taking it away, you know, they're going to be forced to do it, as if magically they're going to suddenly be able to afford it, or they're going to overcome all the technical challenges they'd need, and as if they wouldn't really just fall through the net and be lost. That is a genuine school of thought out there in policy circles, and I'm often quite surprised how strong it is as a rationale.
Yes, I have to say it's something we hear a lot as well. It is this view that if we find something that's really important to people and we place that under threat, that's how we tackle digital exclusion. We pass this burden back onto the individual and we say, well, you'll have to find the money and you'll have to find the skills. And yet we know through so much experience, we know from moving banking online, we know from moving NHS services online, we know from moving homework online, that taking something really important away from people through an analogue option and putting it online does not magically create a digitally inclusive society. I feel like we've tried this now a few times and we could have learned that, but apparently we're still going. And if we think about digital ID as kind of one of the really big specifics that's coming up, it's kind of, I think Baroness Armstrong referred to James Frith seeing this as a big opportunity for digital inclusion, but again, it seems very focused on the individual. Caroline, what do you think some of the risks are if there isn't a workable mainstream offline alternative?
We had a conversation last week around about this, and I think, did no one learn any lessons from the pandemic when they had all of our COVID vaccination status on an app? And it took, 4 goes to get something that actually worked. And then at the end up, there was still a lot of people in the UK who were not able to access certain services because they didn't have the app, and the bit of paper was no longer acceptable. Have we all forgotten that? It wasn't that long ago. And we haven't moved on. Society in general hasn't moved on. We haven't all suddenly become digitally literate overnight. We don't all suddenly have the skills or the digital intelligence to be able to cope with having things on an app, on a phone, and carrying it around with you. So I really worry that if you don't have something to back that up, now it may be along the lines of your driver's license that most of us have now, the photo card. Why are we not thinking about that as being an ID card that doesn't need to be a digital thing? Now that will still get you the access to all of the services that you need. It's got the same, whatever unique barcode they're going to give us. It will still have these unique identifiers on it. But they seem to, and I know the reasoning why is because of cost. And it costs money to print driving licenses. And you cannot be charging people for their ID cards. You just can't. That's even more exclusionary than making them all online. And I know they want it to be online because it's cheaper, but this is a reasonable expectation that the governments, and I say that, the governments, all of them, the devolved nations as well, need to be thinking a bit ahead. And also, let's think about cybersecurity and all of the massive problems that there have been recently. What happens when the system goes down? And we're all relying on something that's on your phone and it's been hacked. And all of a sudden, you get nothing. You get no backup. So back in the days when they introduced photo cards, now some of us in the room are old enough to remember this. Some of us are very much not. I can see some really young faces. But when you used to have a paper license that backed up your photo license. Now, I think it's a long time since they printed the paper licenses. But that was allowed to continue as a contingency for a long time until everybody got up to speed with the photo card IDs for your driving license. Why are we not treating this the same way? Why are we just going, it's all or nothing? We need to have a wee step back and think about everyone who might not be able to do what they think we can.
And let's remember, digital ID is set to cost, I think, £1.8 billion. So we could possibly just make driving licenses for free, but that's a whole other topic. And you were touching there actually on the sort of cybersecurity and the resilience kind of points. Laurie, I mean, you do a huge amount in terms of infrastructure and making sure that we do have redundancy so that if there is a big national emergency, we just had the pandemic, people can still come together. Does it worry you that if we have all our eggs in one basket, everything's just online, that puts the public at more risk?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think resilience is a huge issue, and what I observe is in one element, government, clearly you're hearing it all the time, aren't you? Risk to undersea cables, cyber security, power outages, national events. We need to be more resilient. We saw during COVID, just how important services were, and those national broadcasts that went out on TV, how vital that was. We've seen incidents in Spain with massive national power outages, and they can learn from what networks did well, reliance on the radio network, and then what could recover quickly. You hear a lot of discussion about it there, and then you see in other bits of the forest sort of policies being discussed, which clearly would take you in the opposite direction and leave you reliant on effectively the public internet for the delivery of TV, which clearly, fine, if it works, but if it goes wrong, what happens then? You're clearly less resilient. As a really mature, developed nation, do you really want to put yourself in a position where you're just relying on one delivery network, which clearly is, can be more exposed, has more vulnerabilities than something like the network that we run, which is totally separate to the public internet, it's highly secure, it's resilient, and it's separate. So even though it's got its own challenges, it is likely to be able to survive. And then you've got the radio network, which definitely is used as that ultimate backup, can run off battery, etc., and people can use it in their cars in that absolute worst case. So again, I don't feel that there's sort of joined up sort of thinking around it. And then more broadly, if you take our example, we're running effectively a shared network. All those 1,000 or so masts and towers I talked about, they're used for TV, but they're used for radio as well. They're used for emergency services. They're used for a whole range of government departments have things on those masts. It's used for the utilities sector. It's used for Scottish ferries. It's used for Maritime and Coast Guard. Because it's a shared network, if you take away effectively TV, which is its biggest usage, clearly there are risks to those other services, either increased cost, but also would you actually be able to maintain it over time? And that creates a whole another layer of resilience, risks to different sectors. What would we do in those emergencies? So again, I think that is one which needs to be considered, and there's always a risk with government that if each department's only responsible for a certain area, that they don't think necessarily about that bigger picture and those other sectors and all those other wider risks.
Yeah, go for it.
I really think there should be a lot more media coverage of these issues, and I will do my best to encourage fellow journalists through the NUJ to take up these issues and contact you.
Fine, absolutely. Yeah, and it is a growing, Elizabeth, has spoken on this topic a number of times. The government has been running a review over the last year. They are due to publish a green paper. The media has been picking up on the issue, but I totally agree. Like a lot of issues, the more light that's shone on it, the more chance you have of effectively the nation, society coming to the right conclusion.
Clearly, it seems to me like TV is the next big service that's under threat. We've just seen the telephone lines moving across to be basically IP telephony, all internet run. Certainly, I've had conversations with people in the Highlands, people in Mid-Wales, people in Cumbria, who are really genuinely concerned about what that will mean for them because of the challenges of power cuts, battery backups not offering enough security, infrastructure not making it to their part of the world. If we think about TV potentially being next, and actually if we compare it, the pandemic started over 6 years ago. we're talking about switching off TV in 8 years. It's not a very long period of time, actually, for huge change. What worries each of you most about the potential that actually this doesn't force people online, this just creates a bigger pool of more people who are digitally excluded further? Jenny, Caroline?
Thank you. I don't think the government really has an idea about the unintentional consequences that are going to arise, because we're going to make, if these things happen, people are going to be further and further left behind. And when I talk particularly about older people, they're going to be more isolated, lonely, probably have mental health problems. There will be costs to that as well. So again, we really need to be raising awareness, raising issues, telling government, and feeding into, expressing ourselves, giving our lived experience as much as we can to government.
I don't think the government understand the sheer amount of people who will not be dragged into their version of the world, and who will make a choice when faced with this situation, will make an active choice to disengage. And I've got a couple of stories which are relatively light-hearted and not really life or death situations, but a lady who comes to one of our digital drop-in clinics, she told us the other week that she'd put on the iPlayer and it had come up with the QR code saying that she had to scan it with her phone and then put in her password in order to make it work again. She couldn't work out what to do with it. She didn't understand the QR code, so she's just decided she's not going to watch the iPlayer anymore. Forever. That's it. It's just finished. And we did try and persuade, no, that's it, she's finished. And this is nothing to do with, again, this is important that people understand that digital poverty is not always about money. Another gentleman who comes along, him and his wife have gone cruises their life twice a year sometimes, decided about 2 years ago they're not going to go on a cruise anymore because everything's now on an app. So ordering their drinks, ordering their dinner, booking their excursions, it's all on an app and there's no choice. You don't have the option to go and speak to someone about it. So they've just decided they're not going to do it. These are not poor people. They're going on a cruise twice a year. It's not poverty here, but they've just decided to opt out. Now they're quite, as I say, light-hearted, fairly flippant. The world's not going to, draw to a halt because he's not going on a cruise and she doesn't watch the iPlayer. But what if that situation was different? What if that was someone who was receiving the results of a test and received them as an attachment on an email, which everybody in this room can open an attachment on an email. But when I got my new phone, I struggled to open the attachment that was sent to me on my email, on that app, on my new phone. It took me a bit to get my head around it. So what if they can't see the results of their test? And what if that test actually says, you need to come in, you need to come and see us now? And they miss out? We could be talking about life or death situations. So what's wrong with having a two-tier system? What's wrong with still sending people, when it's something important, something that's essential for life? And I think television, radio, all these things, they are essential for life. Why can't we have a two-tier system? Are the costs so prohibitive? I don't think so. It's a question of diverting funds in the right places. So that's where I see.
And yeah, certainly from my perspective, we've got those millions of households who would need a high-speed fixed broadband connection. So it's not even a low, if it's 10 megabits, would that really sustain TV? If you're in a larger household, you've got people watching on multiple TV sets, you've got someone using the broadband for something else. Would we really want a society where, people's TV stops working because there's constraints on their broadband? That's one issue. The TV sets is a huge issue. I mean, if you do watch Freeview, go home tonight and just unplug it and see what service you get. And what you'd find is, for most people's TVs, you're just getting a series of apps, which you may not know how to use. But if you want to watch BBC One, you've got to go into iPlayer, ITV, have to go into ITVX. That would be your viewing experience. Now, there's a service called Freely, which has been launched by the PSBs, which is developing, but that will be in a tiny number of households. It's not in Samsung, it's not in LG, it's not in Sony TVs, not in those major brands. So that's And that would take decades really to be an answer. So the viewing experience and that TV angle alone would be huge. One of the other areas I do worry about, which I know doesn't get discussed much at all, is even if you can encourage broadband uptake, what if people run into issues and suddenly can't afford to pay? I believe Citizen Vice noted that in the cost of living crisis, 1 million people, I think, gave up their broadband connection, and those on universal credit were 6 times more likely to have given up their broadband. So what happens then? You know, even if you think, oh, we've cracked it, we've solved it, everyone's all right, what if a cost of living crisis comes along and huge numbers of people have to give up their broadband and lose their TV? You know, do we really think there'd be the safety net and the mechanisms in place that would stop that, or the money that would be needed, and how you'd even go about designing a scheme that would capture everyone? Because really, everyone would have an incentive to almost say, I haven't got broadband or I can't afford it, just to qualify. And that could be, what, 6 million households on universal credit, potentially. So there's huge challenges with all of this if they were to implement it as a policy. One of the things in our area that does get raised quite a bit is we did go through a digital transition on TV back in around 2010, where we did a digital switchover, which was when Freeview was created. So everyone used to watch analog, and you moved to digital TV, and we managed that transition, and then that gets cited as if it would be something similar. But the order of magnitude is totally different, because that was actually a really easy transition. It just required people to change their TVs. They had a good incentive to do it, because you've got a massive range of channels. We managed to do it. This time, there'd be no incentive really for people to upgrade or change their TV and incur all the cost. You'd have to overcome the broadband uptake challenge. It's an ongoing cost. It isn't like that, which was a one-off replacement. Once you got a modern TV, you're okay. So a lot of people did it of their own accord. It's just chalk and cheese, totally different. But it does get raised as if, well, we did it then. This surely would be quite straightforward. And I just don't think it would be.
Quick appeal. On the Freeview, I think I got a request to sign a petition this morning from Freeview, which I will do. And can I appeal to everybody else? If it's one little thing we can do, sign that petition.
Absolutely, yes. The Digital Poverty Alliance is delighted to be supporting the petition hosted by Silver Voices to save Freeview. I think if you type in Freeview Lynette petition, you'll find that on Google. And we took that to Downing Street with, I think it was around 140,000 signatures a few weeks ago, but it's continuing to climb and continuing to grow. And I think Laurie raises a really important point, that we do look at the internet as being free. We think there's free resources on the internet. All sorts of government advertisements on radio will say, and you can find more information about this by visiting GovUK. But we must remember, okay, for us, maybe it feels free because it's something that we've already paid for. It's a sunk investment. It's happening anyway. It's here on our phone. But actually, if you're somebody relying on mobile data, I think it was something like 38% of our community said that they were reliant on mobile data and had felt isolated purely because that data had run out. And if you think about running out of data halfway through a month and going, I'm offline now until my data resets, that is an incredibly frustrating experience that sets you back from being able to complete any kind of task online, let alone stream TV, which is, that eats data. If you've ever moved house and you've not been able to get your broadband up and running and you've gone, oh, I'll just stream it off my phone, and then you get your phone bill. That's a very expensive mistake I will never make again. So I guess the sort of end point that I'm going to say to the panel before we go to Q&A is, there are people who say, well, we should be ambitious. We should just hope that this will be solved. That does sit against the fact that Joseph Rowntree Foundation research shows that poverty is climbing. Do we think that inherently choice is important, even if the poverty angle was somehow magically solved by the end of the decade? Do we think choice is important in terms of how people want to access healthcare, how people want to communicate with their local authority, how people want to enjoy linear TV?
Yes, absolutely. Choice is key to everything we do as human beings. We don't respond well, you know, I'm sure if there's psychologists and sociologists in the room that would be able to tell me, people don't respond well to being forced into corners. They will react and behave as they should do for a period of time. History shows this time and time again. That's why, you know, people rise up and revolt against societies that they don't believe in, that they don't want to work under anymore, don't want to live under anymore. Because if you force people into doing things, you will always, always get a backlash from it. If you give people the choice, then everything becomes a lot easier. And there are many people, some people I know who are the same age as me, perfectly digitally able, perfectly wealthy enough to be able to cope with it, who do not want, they just do not want to live their lives online. And what's wrong with that? You know, why should they be funneled down a system that says this is the way that you must and have to if you want to engage with the rest of society? And they can't, they're not the only people out there. And can we also just have a wee thought for a moment about some other people who will not be forced into this situation? The travelling community. They're ignored and neglected a lot of the time. But you cannot expect a group of individuals who live the way that they live and exist the way that they choose to exist to suddenly just put out their entire lives online. They don't live on the main grid, you know, so how are we expecting them to suddenly just become online? Or do we just do, as I think would happen, ignore them and push them off to the side and hope that they'll disappear quietly in a corner and not make too much fuss? It's very unfair. And Elizabeth mentioned the Joseph Rowntree Foundation just there. There was a quote that came from the last report that they did, which was data or dinner. And that's a really real question for some families out there who are relying on mobile data for their internet access. Do I pay for the data to allow my children to do their homework or to apply for a job or to do whatever, or do I feed my family? It's not really a difficult question. People are going to feed their family rather than, and that's why we saw broadband being given up through the cost of living crisis. It was one of the first things that we saw happening. That was the easiest thing for people to give up their broadband, because it was seen as a luxury. It's not a luxury anymore, and these people still cannot afford to bring it back again. So there's a lot of things there that we need to, and choice has got to be at the heart of this.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree that choice is important for a number of reasons. I mean, one is there's always, you know, where people can afford alternatives and have it, there's always reasons at their individual household level why they're doing one thing over the other. You know, it could be that, you know, they get a good broadband reception in their main room, but they've got other TV sets around the house, so they don't. Or actually, we know broadband around the house isn't necessarily that great. Or they've tried it and they like the fact that, you know, if you're watching a live football match, that you don't get a delay, you know, compared to watching it on something else or having it over the phone. So you don't know, you know, whether a goal scored in advance. It will be about the reliability. You know, there's going to be lots of individual reasons why they're making that choice and why you should expect them to be able to carry on having that choice. I think that resilience and that overall resilience in society, most people get that, and therefore that's part of that choice equation. I think generally around, you know, competition is good. So having choice, having different networks also avoids a situation over time. For instance, if everything was just over the internet, we know that, you know, even if people think they're getting a good deal initially, what's to happen once that group have cornered the whole market, what's going to happen to the prices and things that get charged for those services. So having choice happens to keep that competition as well, which I think is often overlooked as an issue.
Yes, of course, I agree with both the panelists, but I think we could all do much more to help people make the choice to choose digital. I think it was Baroness Armstrong who said earlier that not enough is known about where to get help, or people just don't know the options. But through, you know, Digital Poverty Alliance and others, and journalists like myself, edited Connections for All, a newsletter for the National Pensions Convention. An important part of that was signposting people to where they could get help on all sorts of things and where they could learn about things. So I think perhaps we could all do a little bit more to raise awareness of what help is available.
I think that's a great point to finish on before we go to the Q&A, that actually people don't know where to find support. And it is this balance between ensuring that as many people can access the support and the help and the digital services that they want to and they need to, without creating greater digital exclusion by pushing more things online until we've solved the problems that we already have. Do we have any questions in the room or indeed online? So this is your reminder to the online people. If you do have a question, do pop that in the live chat, and Claire here in the room will speak up on your behalf. We've got our first question there.
Hi, thank you for a really great panel discussion. My name is Pargol, I'm from Barts Health NHS Trust. I've worked on a digital inclusion project before, and I'm currently working on a very digital focused project, but I've had the pleasure of working with our community, which is very rich in diversity in East London. But I suppose one of my questions is really around following on from the point you made about, you know, raising awareness to support people and increasing their digital skills. That's something in the position that I'm in, I see a lot of attention given to in terms of increasing awareness and, you know, supporting people develop those skills. But the parallel side of it in terms of safeguarding analog is something that I don't see as much of in those strategy policy-making discussions. And even with the NDAP, I suppose my question is, how is that being embedded in there, and how can we mandate that better in all our different positions, whether that be in local authorities or the NHS or community circles? How can we help safeguard that whilst obviously still supporting people to develop their digital skills with the inevitable shift to digital? But we do want to safeguard that. I just struggle to see a formal way to support that. And I wonder if any of you have kind of a route to embed that into our work more.
So it's a great question, and certainly within our National Delivery and Advocacy Plan, we have a couple of actions that refer to saving, preserving offline alternatives. I think it's a slight memory test now, but I'm pretty sure one sits within Mission 2, which is around the affordability and access to services, and I believe the other sits in Mission 3, which is around the accessibility of services. And we do think that this is something that is fundamental within any digitisation project, continuing to actually remember that there are millions of people across the UK for whom digital services are out of reach. And penalising those people and saying, well, you better get a grip and get online because this is the way we're going to do it now, is not a good way, in our view, of achieving digital equity. So we do very strongly advocate for saving terrestrial TV, making sure that if there is a digital ID, there's a non-digital version of that that's offline. Thinking about that through homework, one of our recommendations in our Tech for Families report was that we need to get children laptops, but we also need to ensure that if children don't have access to tech, there's an offline alternative as well. So certainly that is something that we continue to do, and we're really happy to engage with health trusts to advise on how best to do that. I don't know if other panellists have a concrete suggestion on that one quickly. Okay, we'll move on to our next question because I am getting the sign that time is moving on.
Thank you. I agreed with everything you said, but, and there's a comment rather than a question, you've all been talking about the people aspect. The people in charge of all of this are people, but they're thinking as bureaucrats, central government, local government, and in some organisations. And the only way you're really going to persuade them is to speak on their own terms. In other words, they're looking at cost savings. We have to identify the costs to the people and try to make sure that when they bring in anything, when they give the cost of moving and they say it's only £1 million, it's neither here nor there. No, it's more like £5 billion. But that case has to be built. And that would be an interesting exercise.
It would, and it's something we'd love to do. Laurie, you have lots of opportunities to talk to senior civil servants. How do you think they perceive the different perspectives of people versus cost?
I mean, look, what I'd say, one thing on cost is certainly from our perspective about keeping Freeview going, we have made sure we have put forward a fully costed proposal which can keep it going for another 10 years, and it can reduce the cost for the broadcasters by up to 50%. So we recognise, and maybe that's a general trend, is with these more traditional systems, or in this case it's still digital, but the alternative to being all fully online, that can't stand still either, and you need to make sure they're as efficient as possible over time to make sure that we're not wasting money, and clearly if people have to funding and invest in both, you need to make sure that you're doing it for efficiently and as cheaply as possible. So that is a key requirement, and certainly that has been the way we have approached it. What I would observe from, and you and I have both been involved in discussions with government and industry within TV distribution forum, there are certain groups who clearly have the government's ear, and their voice is perhaps louder than others. And one of the things I was encouraged by was your involvement and Silver Voice's involvement, who genuinely could put over the perspective of the viewer and those in digital poverty. And you do worry that without that, those views and perspectives could be overlooked or downplayed. Because, again, particularly if you've got a government department that really focuses on working very closely with a particular sector of industry, quite naturally over time, they will be looking out for their concerns and their interests. And it takes organisations such as yourself to broaden it out and open it and say, hang on a minute, you've got to think about it from this much broader perspective, otherwise you could make the wrong decision.
Absolutely, and I think it comes back to we're all people. Even the people making decisions we don't like are still people, and their views and their experiences are formed by those they are around, and very frequently those they are around are digitally included, and they often don't have the experience of working with people who are on low incomes, working with people in extremely rural areas, working with people who are older, who have long-term health conditions, who have a range of reasons why actually digital options are never going to be the optimal solution for them. I think we had one final question here. Microphone is just heading on its way to you.
Thank you. I thought your example of the people who aren't going on cruises anymore was quite interesting. My question is, do we perhaps over-egg the poverty line and not enough about the missed opportunities for profitability that many organisations are experiencing without realising it? I do research in the transport industry, and I know lots of examples of people who are just not travelling, particularly on public transport, because they don't understand the complex system of getting tickets and travel and when to travel and so on. Do we do enough research about the missed? After all, we're a capitalist society, aren't we? And taking your colleague's point there about the decision makers, should we do more work to point those kind of things out?
Can I just come in on that? So, whilst I totally agree we need to be given some serious information about costs up the way, but I think that if we can get some big players in the marketplace to understand how much money they are losing by not engaging with these people, because Charlie and his wife are only going 2 cruises a year. That's a lot of money when you start to add that up. And that's not. One of my colleagues has a personal letter and email writing campaign, and she is attacking all of the major airlines worldwide at the moment to say to them, you are missing out. People are no longer wanting to go through airports because they don't know about QR codes. They don't want their boarding pass on their phone. They don't know how to work it. And you have done nothing to support them. They're your customer, and you've just lost them. They're now going a coach trip. They're spending lots and lots of money on the coach trip, but they're not flying anymore because they just don't want to deal with that, and there's no one to support them. So she's got a constant campaign going just now. And I think with these people on board, if these people can come on board, big industry players who understand they're losing money, and that ageing population that we like to hear referred to all the time, they're the people with more capital to spend than any other of the demographics. Now, yes, there's poverty, obviously, amongst the Asian population as well, but overall, they've got more money. These are important consumers, and they are being overlooked and neglected. And if these companies can realise that, they'll start to pressure the powers that be to put things in place.
And I think it's a really good question, and I agree. And maybe I'd frame it as there's a danger of ideology here, where people just get fixated on an end goal and just saying, well, we've got to clearly achieve that. And superficially, often it does sound like a good idea, but it's only when you really think about it more and the complexity and the challenges and actually what different groups, sectors, companies might lose on that journey, and where they perhaps are missing out on commercial opportunities if they just get too ideological about it. I think that is a danger, and I observe that. So in the case of the TV, for instance, you know, in Freeview, broadcasters, you know, they effectively do face a more limited competition than they do out on the general internet, on YouTube, where there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of different channels from all over the world, where they have to face competition from them. When it comes to advertising, generating advertising, actually, they do quite well in the way that we watch TV. And commercially, you know, we've seen modelling and forecasts which shows that is actually the case. So they could lose out by that jump, even though if you talk to, you know, certain people, they would say, no, of course we've got to move down that route. And, you know, a lot of organisations, big organisations, they're fairly broad, and so you may have one element of it who is fixated on it, and then the other elements who perhaps have other objectives, and, you know, whether it's caring about the nations, the regions, or different groups, they naturally have a different perspective. But again, is their voice heard in the debates within their own organisations? So I think it's another way of reflecting what you've stated there. Is actually sometimes there are actually really good reasons why they're actually benefiting by not going down that route, but that gets lost because of a fixation on a sort of end goal.
This is, of course, also part of the access to cash debate and campaigns against the closure of banks. And I know that through correspondence we've got in the National Pensioners Convention, when people complain that they can't book, you know, they can't get on a train because they can't use cash, etc. That's part of it, isn't it? So we need to be campaigning more on more banks, and also providers also allowing you to pay other than online.
Some really important points there, and I think also, yes, digital poverty is still a relatively young field within wider poverty and wider social justice research, and a lot more data is needed, a lot more evidence is needed, more research is absolutely essential, and of course is Mission 5 of our NDAP, is all about increasing that evidence base. A huge thanks to our second panel of the afternoon. Let's give them all a big hand. That does wrap us up for our launch event today. So thank you for coming along. If you've been watching along, if you've watched the whole thing, thank you. Well done. It's been a marathon. It's been a long old webinar. You do have copies on your seats of the NDAP's and our 25th anniversary report. I would like to take a moment to thank everyone who has led us to be here for 25 years. As I said, we started out as the e-learning foundation, then we became the Learning Foundation. During the COVID pandemic, the trustees decided that we needed to take a broader focus that wasn't just on schools. So we set up the Digital Poverty Alliance as an initiative alongside Curry's and the Institute of Engineering and Technology. And then a couple of years ago, we rebranded as the Digital Poverty Alliance. So it has been a squiggly journey for a charity. We used to be something totally different. But what hasn't changed is that need to connect people with technology, but to do it in a sensitive way that works for them, that ensures they can have the devices, the data, the skills, the confidence that they need, that services are created in an accessible way, that support is available, but actually that we do maintain that choice and we give people the opportunity to empower themselves in the way that they want to be empowered without taking that choice away from them. There are, of course, next steps. I never let anyone just go away from a DPA event without giving some level of homework. When you pop downstairs and leave today, you will find copies of some of our other reports. Please do take those, have a look through the recommendations, see if there's anything relevant that your organisation can do. One of the bits of paper you'll find down there is a copy of our charter. And if you're not yet a charter signatory, why not? Why haven't you done this? Take this step. It's amazing. You get a little badge and everything. But even more importantly, you have a way through 5 different pillars to be able to evidence how your organisation is going to take action around digital poverty. Again, within the National Delivery and Advocacy Plan, you'll find different ways that you can be involved in those missions. And that includes whether you're a government organisation, whether you're a business, whether you're an individual, something that you can commit to do, even if you're not signing the charter, something you can commit to do and feel like you are taking some action. If you do sign the charter, you're also still just in time to sneak in, and you will be automatically entered into the UK Digital Inclusion Awards, which will be announced at the End Digital Poverty Day gala reception on the 10th of September, just down the road near Charing Cross. So, with all of that in mind, please don't forget your homework. Please pick that up on the way out. If you are watching online, big thanks again, and you can, of course, visit digitalpovertyalliance.org, and from there you can find the NDAP. It's the top story on there today. You'll also find how to sign the charter and our other research reports. Thank you again to our panellists, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.